All right, Bress, the war. Let's get into all this material you've given me on Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's February 2025. This war has been going on for 3 years now.
Yeah.
And the big question on everyone's mind is peace even possible at this point?
It's a great question. The sources make clear that everybody thinks negotiations are the only way out of this.
Right.
But
yeah,
can they agree on what a peace deal looks like? That's a whole other...
That's a whole other challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to make things even more complicated than they already are.
Yeah.
The U.S. election really threw a wrench in things.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Trump is back in the White House.
Right.
And he's made peace in Ukraine a top priority.
Right.
So we've got leaked documents about possible peace plans.
Yeah.
Rumors of all these high-level meetings. And just a ton of speculation flying around.
It's a very fluid situation. And you're right, Trump is, well,
yeah,
he's known for being unorthodox. You could even say unpredictable. And him being back in the White House, that just adds another whole layer of complexity to this situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's break down what we know from these sources.
Yeah.
Starting with just the situation on the ground.
Yeah.
What's the military picture looking like?
Well, Russia has made some pretty significant advances.
Yeah.
They now control Velika Novosilka.
Oh.
That's a strategically important town in the Donbass region.
Right.
And this win could give them enough momentum to push even further.
Okay.
And it's important to remember that success on the battlefield usually means more leverage when you're negotiating.
Right. Whoever's winning gets to call the shots, basically.
Exactly.
So militarily, Russia seems to be in a pretty strong position.
Yeah.
But what about their political goals? What is Putin actually hoping to get out of all of this?
Well, Putin's demands, they haven't really changed from the beginning of this whole conflict.
Okay.
He wants Ukraine to completely abandon any thought of joining NATO.
Right.
He wants them to recognize every territory that Russia has annexed.
Which includes Crimea.
Including Crimea, yep.
Okay.
And he wants Ukraine to accept very strict limits on their military.
Okay.
Oh, and he also wants the sanctions lifted.
Yeah.
Which is a huge point of contention with the West.
Yeah, those are some pretty tough demands.
Yeah.
It's hard to see Ukraine agreeing to all of that.
Yeah.
Especially after fighting so hard for so long.
Yeah. I mean, that's where this internal debate within Ukraine comes in.
Right.
Zelenskyy, he says publicly that he wants peace.
Okay.
And that he's open to talking directly to Putin.
Okay.
But there are a lot of people in Ukraine who are worried about getting a bad peace deal.
Right.
Especially if it means making huge concessions.
Right.
And actually, some Ukrainian military officials are even hesitant about having a ceasefire.
Really?
Yeah, they're worried that Russia will just use it to regroup and rearm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Given everything they've sacrificed, they would be wary of that.
Right.
But speaking of peace plans, there's one that's really been making headlines. This so-called 100-day peace plan that Trump has supposedly drafted.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So this leaked plan, it lays out this really fast series of events.
Okay.
So phone calls between Trump, Putin, and Zelenskyy.
Okay.
And then they meet face to face.
Okay.
Then there's a ceasefire.
Okay.
Troop withdrawals, and then a final peace agreement.
Yeah.
All within 100 days.
Wow.
And it would all end on May 9th, which is Victory Day in Russia.
That's incredibly ambitious.
It is. Yeah, it almost seems too good to be true.
Yeah, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, there are a lot of people who just think it's completely unrealistic.
Correct.
Ukrainian officials have actually called it a fake, straight up.
Right.
And even people within the U.S. government are expressing some serious doubts.
But Trump does have that reputation for being a deal maker.
He does. He does.
And our sources show that he's already talked to both Putin and Xi Jinping about this.
That's true. He's really positioning himself as the key guy in all this.
Right.
He seems to believe that China can pressure Russia into making a deal.
Okay.
Which is an interesting thought.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that Trump also has a history of making promises that he doesn't always keep.
Oh, yeah?
Remember when he said he could solve the North Korean nuclear issue?
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
That didn't exactly go as he predicted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Trump's involvement is definitely a factor. But we should probably be a little careful about reading too much into these leaks and rumors at this point.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
So if Trump's plan is being dismissed as unrealistic,
Yeah.
what are the other options?
Well, what other paths to peace are people talking about? Well, in the beginning, Zelenskyy proposed this 10-point peace plan.
Okay.
It focused on things like, restoring Ukraine's territory,
Yeah.
getting compensation for damages, bringing war criminals to justice, that kind of thing.
Right.
But that plan doesn't really seem to be going anywhere now.
Okay.
And then later he suggested this victory plan, which was all about getting more military aid and joining NATO.
Oh.
But that's facing a lot of pushback too.
So it seems like everyone has their own idea of what peace should look like.
Yeah.
But nobody can actually agree on how to get there.
Right.
And of course, you've got the whole question of international involvement. What roles are Europe and China expected to play in all of this?
Well, Europe's role is kind of unclear right now. Some European countries are pushing for a negotiated settlement,
Okay.
while others are still really against making any concessions to Russia.
Okay.
The new U.S. Secretary of State, Marco Rubio,
Okay.
he's known for being pretty hawkish.
Yeah.
He said he wants a just peace, but he doesn't think Ukraine can realistically get back all the territory that they've lost.
So the U.S. isn't pushing for a complete Ukrainian victory anymore.
Not really, no.
That's a pretty big shift in policy.
It is, yeah, and I think it just shows how complicated this whole situation has become. The longer the war goes on, the harder it is to imagine either side actually winning outright.
Yeah.
There's this growing sense that some kind of compromise is going to have to happen,
Right.
even if a lot of people don't like it.
And what about China? They've been pretty quiet throughout this whole thing.
Yeah, they have, but they're still a major player.
Okay.
They have a lot of economic and political influence.
Right.
And both Russia and the U.S. are trying to get them on their side.
Right.
There's even been talk of a peacekeeping force with troops from both India and China.
Really?
Yeah, which would be pretty interesting.
That's a real wild card.
It is.
But even with all these players involved, it sounds like there's still some really big obstacles to peace.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the level of mistrust between Russia and Ukraine is at an all-time high.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's the whole issue of security guarantees for Ukraine.
Right.
If NATO membership is off the table, what other options are even realistic at this point?
That is the big question, and it's been tough to answer. Some people have suggested a model like Finland had during the Cold War,
Okay.
where Ukraine stays neutral but keeps close economic ties with Russia.
Yep.
And then others have said maybe there should be a more formal security agreement with multiple countries involved.
Okay.
But none of those ideas have really gotten a lot of support yet.
It kind of feels like we're back where we started.
A little bit, yeah.
Everyone agrees that peace is necessary,
Yeah,
but nobody knows how to actually make it happen.
pretty much.
Okay, it's just we've got the territory issue and the security issue as two major roadblocks to peace.
Right.
What else is standing in the way?
Well, we can't forget about the sanctions.
Right.
Russia really wants them gone.
Yeah.
And they're a major bargaining chip for the West.
Right. The sanctions have really hurt the Russian economy.
You have.
But I don't see the West lifting them without getting something big from Russia in return.
Exactly. And it's not even just about the money.
Right.
The sanctions are also a way for the West to say, hey, what you did was wrong, and to try and stop Russia from doing something like this again.
Right, right. It's a punishment, but also a deterrent.
Exactly. There's a moral and strategic side to it, too.
Yeah, it's all connected. And we can't forget about the human cost of this war.
Yeah,
Millions of Ukrainians have had to leave their homes.
that's right.
Any peace deal is going to have to address that and the needs of those affected.
Absolutely. Rebuilding Ukraine is going to be a huge job,
Yeah.
physically and emotionally.
Right.
And it's going to take a huge international effort and a really long-term commitment.
So given everything we've talked about, is there any reason to be optimistic about the chances for peace?
Well, it's a tough situation, no doubt.
Yeah,
But I think it's important to remember that wars don't last forever.
right.
At some point, everyone involved has to realize that negotiating a settlement is the only way to stop the fighting.
That's a good point. And history shows us that even conflicts that seem impossible to resolve
Yeah,
can eventually be worked out through diplomacy.
exactly. Like take the Cold War. For decades, the U.S. and Soviet Union were locked in this standoff.
Yeah,
But eventually they realized that it couldn't go on,
right.
and they found a way to coexist peacefully.
So there's always hope, even when things look really bad.
Always. But to get a lasting peace in Ukraine,
Yeah,
it's going to take strong leadership from everybody,
yeah,
a real willingness to compromise,
yeah.
and maybe a little bit of luck.
Well, let's hope for all of those things, because while wars don't last forever,
Yeah.
the damage they cause can last for generations.
Absolutely. And that damage isn't just physical.
Right.
It goes much deeper. It
Yeah.
affects everything. Politics, economics,
Yeah.
culture,
And
even
you-
national identity.
So yeah, we're focused on stopping the fighting right now.
Yeah.
But building a lasting peace is a much bigger job.
It is. It's not just about signing a piece of paper.
Right.
It's about rebuilding trust,
Yeah.
fixing the things that caused the conflict in the first place,
Right.
and creating an environment where peace can actually last.
And that's going to take time and patience and a lot of hard work from everybody.
It will, but history has shown us that even the hardest conflicts can be resolved.
Right.
We just have to keep hoping for a better future and keep working toward it.
Well said. All right, so let's change gears a little bit and look at some of the other ideas that have been floated.
Okay.
We talked about peacekeeping forces before.
Yeah.
What are the chances of that actually happening?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
The idea has been around for a while,
Okay.
but it's getting more attention now,
Right.
especially with this idea of bringing in India and China.
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise. Why those two countries?
Well, both India and China are big players on the world stage,
Right.
and they both have experience with peacekeeping operations.
Okay.
Plus, they have pretty good relationships with both Russia and Ukraine,
Okay.
which is really important in this kind of situation.
That makes sense. But wouldn't Russia see troops from the West as a provocation?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
That's why this idea of involving India and China is so interesting.
Okay.
It might be something that Russia is more okay with,
Yeah.
but it would still be a strong message against any more aggression.
Okay. I can see the logic there. But what about Ukraine?
Yeah,
Would they be comfortable with foreign troops on their land,
that's a good point.
especially from countries that haven't been as vocal in their support?
Ukraine has said many times that they want security guarantees from the West,
Right.
especially from NATO.
Right.
So accepting peacekeepers from countries that haven't said they'll defend Ukraine,
Yeah.
that might be a hard sell.
So it sounds like there are a lot of delicate issues to work out.
Definitely.
What would the peacekeepers even do?
Yeah.
Would they be allowed to use force?
Yeah. Those are all really important questions that would need to be figured out very carefully.
Right.
The peacekeepers would probably be there to make sure everyone sticks to the ceasefire,
Okay.
to keep the warring sides apart,
Yeah.
and to help get humanitarian aid to people who need it. As for using force, it would probably only be for self-defense
Okay.
or to protect civilians.
And where would they be?
Right.
Would they be stationed along the front lines or in specific areas like Donbass?
That's another tricky one.
Okay.
Russia might want the peacekeepers in places that basically make their territorial gains official,
Yeah.
while Ukraine would probably want to go back to the borders they had before the invasion.
It sounds like figuring out the details of a peacekeeping mission
Yeah.
would be almost as complicated as negotiating the peace treaty itself.
It wouldn't be easy, that's for sure.
Right.
But if everyone was really serious about finding a peaceful solution, it could be done.
I hope so, because the alternative is just more of this terrible war.
Exactly. And the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah.
Not just for Ukraine and Russia,
Right.
but for the whole world.
Right. This conflict has already put a lot of strain on alliances.
It has.
It's made the world less stable.
Yeah.
And it's raised the possibility of an even bigger war.
It's true. So finding a way to end the fighting and make sure it doesn't happen again
Yeah.
is really important.
Right. Not just for the people of Ukraine,
Right.
but for peace and security everywhere.
Absolutely.
You mentioned earlier that Putin seems really focused on the Donbass region.
He does.
Is that still his main goal?
It's hard to know for sure.
Yeah.
But there are some signs that his plan to take over the whole Donbass region might have changed.
Yep.
Remember at the beginning, there were reports that he might be open to a deal that just involved Donetsk and Luhansk.
Right.
But now
Yeah.
it seems like he wants more.
So he's raised the stakes.
Yeah, it looks that way.
What does he want now?
His demands now include the Zaporizhia and Kherson regions,
Wow.
which would give him a land bridge to Crimea
Okay.
and a big chunk of the coastline along the Sea of Azov.
That's a pretty strategic move, but it also makes a peace deal even harder to reach.
It does, and it makes you wonder what Putin's end game really is.
Fair.
Is he happy just taking these territories, or does he want even more?
Like what?
Like Odessa or even Kiev?
That's a scary thought. Is there any evidence that he wants to take over all of Ukraine?
It's hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but we can't rule it out.
Right.
Especially if he thinks the West is weak or not serious about stopping him.
Which brings us back to Trump and his, well, let's just say his unpredictable approach.
Yeah.
He says he wants peace,
Yeah.
but then he gives Ukraine more weapons.
Right.
It's confusing.
That's classic Trump.
Yeah.
Keep everyone guessing and make your opponents confused.
Right.
And try to use that confusion to get what you want.
Yeah, but is it actually a good strategy here?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Could it backfire and make Putin even more unwilling to compromise? It could. That's definitely a risk.
Yeah.
And it's one of the many things we just don't know about Trump's role in all this.
Right. His supporters say he's the only one who can make a deal with Putin.
Right.
But people who don't like him are worried that he's too unpredictable and that he might give Putin too much.
Right. And end up hurting Ukraine in the process.
So, again, we're back to uncertainty.
Yeah.
It seems like every time there's a little bit of hope, something else pops up.
Yeah.
What about the war crimes?
Right.
We've seen some truly awful things happen in this war.
We have.
Will that be part of any peace talks?
That's a really important question and one that often gets forgotten when everyone's trying to find a quick political solution.
Right.
But getting justice for the victims of these crimes,
Yeah.
that has to be part of any peace deal.
But won't that be a sticking point for Russia?
Probably.
I mean, they've denied doing anything wrong.
Right.
And they haven't cooperated with any of the international investigations.
You're right. It's very unlikely that Russia is going to willingly hand over people to be tried by the International Criminal Court.
Right.
But there are other ways to get accountability,
Like what?
like truth and reconciliation commissions or special tribunals that are set up just for this situation. These might be something that Russia would agree to.
Yeah.
And they could still provide a way to get some justice for the victims.
So there's a chance, at least, that some people will be held accountable.
Yeah.
Even if it's not perfect.
Right.
What about reparations?
Yeah.
Will Russia have to pay for all the damage they've caused in Ukraine?
That's another tough one. There's no question that there will be pressure on Russia to help rebuild Ukraine.
Right.
But the damage is so extensive, it's hard to imagine them being able to pay for all of it.
So it's likely that the rest of the world's going to have to step in and provide a lot of financial aid to Ukraine.
Most likely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot.
We have.
We've talked about the military situation, the political goals, the key players, the obstacles to peace, and some of the alternative scenarios.
Right.
It's clear that getting to peace in Ukraine is going to be a long and hard process.
There's no quick fix.
No.
It's going to take a lot of patience and persistence.
Yeah.
And a willingness to have tough conversations, even with people we don't agree with at all.
But with all the complexity and uncertainty, is there anything that gives you hope? Any signs that a real lasting peace might be possible?
Well, despite all the challenges, I do think there are a few glimmers of hope.
Okay.
First, it seems like more and more people, even in Russia, are realizing that this war can't go on forever.
Okay.
The economic costs are going up.
Right.
A lot of people are dying.
Yeah.
And Russia is becoming more and more isolated from the rest of the world.
So you're saying that war fatigue might eventually force Russia to make a deal?
Yeah, it's possible. And second, even with all the disagreements and bad feelings, everyone still seems to understand that the only way to really fix this and keep it from turning into something even worse is to negotiate a settlement.
Right.
Nobody wants to see this war spread and pull other countries in.
So the fear of what might happen if this keeps going might actually push everyone towards peace.
It could. And the last thing is, we can't forget how tough the Ukrainian people have been.
Yeah.
I mean, their determination to protect their country, their spirit, even when things are so bad.
Right.
And their belief in a democratic future, it's really inspiring.
Yeah, they've shown the whole world what real courage and resilience look like.
They really have.
That's a powerful thing, and we shouldn't underestimate it. But let's talk about what a peace deal might actually look like.
Okay.
We've talked about all the roadblocks.
Yeah.
But what would a good agreement actually include?
Well, a peace agreement that could actually work would have to deal with a few key things.
Okay.
First, there would have to be a clear ceasefire agreement.
Yeah.
Something everyone could understand, and that could be enforced.
Right.
This would mean pulling troops back from the front lines
Right.
and setting up a strong system to make sure nobody breaks the ceasefire.
That sounds really important.
It is.
But also really tough to do, given how much nobody trusts each other right now.
You're right. Building trust is going to be a slow process. Yeah.
And it'll probably need help from people who aren't on either side.
Okay.
Like international organizations or respected mediators.
Okay. So what about the territory issue?
Yeah.
Is there any way they can compromise on that?
That's one of the hardest parts of this whole conflict.
Right.
Ukraine wants all of its territory back.
Which includes Crimea.
Including Crimea.
Right.
But Russia isn't showing any signs of giving up the areas they've annexed.
So is that a deal breaker? Can they even make peace without dealing with the territory question?
It's really unlikely that Ukraine would agree to anything that officially gives territory to Russia.
Yeah.
But maybe there are some creative solutions,
Okay.
like interim agreements,
Okay.
that basically put off deciding the final status of those disputed areas
Okay.
while they focus on more urgent things like the ceasefire and getting troops out.
So kind of like kicking the can down the road.
In a way, yeah, it wouldn't be perfect.
Right.
But it might be the only way to get past this stalemate.
And make room for more talks in the future.
Right.
But this would need a lot of trust and commitment from everyone involved.
Okay. And what about security guarantees?
Yeah.
What could Ukraine realistically get that would make them feel safe from Russia in the future?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Like we said, NATO membership is off the table for now.
Right.
Some people have suggested that Ukraine should be neutral,
Okay.
like Austria or Finland were during the Cold War.
Right.
So Ukraine would promise not to join any military alliances.
Okay.
And in exchange, they'd get security guarantees from other countries,
Okay.
maybe even including Russia.
But would Russia actually keep those promises? And would it really be enough to stop them from attacking again?
Those are good questions.
Yeah.
Being neutral wouldn't be as safe as being in NATO.
Right.
And it would need Russia to completely change how they view Ukraine.
Yeah.
But it could be a place to start.
Okay.
A way to start building a new system of security in the region. One that lowers tensions and makes things more stable.
It sounds like any solution is going to involve a lot of compromise from everyone.
It will, yeah.
No easy answers.
There's no magic formula for peace.
Right.
It'll take flexibility and creative thinking
Yeah.
and a willingness to consider solutions that aren't perfect,
Right.
but that could help create a better future.
Okay, so what about the rest of the world?
Yeah.
What can other countries do to help bring about peace?
The international community has a really important role to play.
Okay.
They can help get people talking,
Yeah.
provide humanitarian aid,
Yeah.
and support Ukraine in rebuilding.
Right.
It's going to take a group effort from governments, international organizations, and regular people.
And will the peace agreement address the war crimes?
That's a tough question, but it's an important one.
Yeah.
If we ignore the terrible things that have happened,
Yeah.
it sets a bad example.
Right.
And undermines the whole idea of international law and human rights.
But how can we hold people accountable? Russia probably won't cooperate with investigations or hand over suspects.
You're right. That's a big problem, but like we talked about before,
Yeah.
there are ways to get justice other than the usual criminal trials.
All right.
Things like truth and reconciliation commissions.
Okay.
Or special tribunals that combine international and domestic law.
Okay.
These might be something that Russia would accept,
Right.
and they could still offer some justice for the victims.
So maybe there's a way to balance the need for justice with keeping the peace talks going?
Yeah, that's the idea.
And what about the economic damage?
Right.
Who's going to pay for Ukraine to rebuild?
That's another complicated issue.
Yeah.
The destruction is just massive.
Yeah.
It's going to take years, maybe even decades, for Ukraine to fully recover.
Wow.
It's clear that Russia started this war,
Right.
so they'll be under pressure to help pay for rebuilding.
Yeah.
But the international community is also going to have to step up and provide a lot of financial and technical help.
So it's going to take a global effort to help Ukraine get back on its feet.
It will, and it's not just about the money.
Right.
It's about providing expertise and sharing knowledge
Yeah.
and working together in a way that will let Ukraine build a stronger and more prosperous future.
Okay, so after all of this, where do we stand? Is there any reason to be optimistic about peace in Ukraine?
It's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
And there are no easy answers.
Right.
The way forward is unclear and the challenges are huge.
Yeah.
But I do believe that there's still hope.
Okay.
People are resilient and they want peace.
Yeah.
As long as we keep working towards a solution
Right.
and keep talking to each other,
Yeah.
there's always a chance for a just and lasting peace.
Well said. So on that note of cautious optimism,
Yeah.
we'll leave you with this final thought. Peace may seem impossible right now,
It does feel that way sometimes.
but it's never really out of reach.
Right.
As long as there are people who want it,
Yeah.
who are willing to fight for it, and who believe in it,
Absolutely.
there's always hope.
Always.
Subscribe to our podcast, which is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
We are here to make things clear.